Alright, I just took a massive ass shit, which means it's time for another game grind. Good morning, YouTubeulum! My name is NoNoNoah, and welcome to another game grind. Now, this episode of Game Grind is going to be about a game that was a smidgen in the past, but I really liked it, and I never heard anything about it when it first came out, but I noticed it's getting popular now, so I wanted to talk about it. Anyway, I had the great privilege of playing a game called Moonlighter recently. If Fate and the Binding of Isaac had a love child together, it would definitely be this game, as long as the game was thrown down into a large bin on the floor and forgotten to the pages of time. I've absolutely fallen in love with this top-down dungeon crawling, not shooter, but might as well be. It's very fun, and I implore you to go check it out. But first, let's talk a little bit about Moonlighter. Unfortunately, there really is no story aspect to it, but there is small bits and pieces through the lore I've found, and also a couple of the scenes you get as you progress through the game, so let's just kind of talk about that for a minute. Not too heavy on this one, not a lot of spoilers. It's more of a progression state of game, but if you don't want spoilers, make sure you guys skip ahead to whatever the time code is down here. I'd probably either put it in the description, or maybe it's flashing on the screen, and perhaps once I didn't be a lazy asshole when I did this. There's very little story involved in Moonlighter. All you need to know is that there are heroes and merchants. These two sets of people investigate and battle in local dungeons for fame and profit. Mostly profit, but since a large chunk of heroes and merchants have died in these dungeons, they have been shut down in order for no more death to occur. We play as Will, a young merchant that inherited his shop, the Moonlighter, from his granddad after his death, and a lovely amulet that lets him survive getting beaten to death in dungeons by spitting him back out before dying. From what I read in the weird lore pages that you find in these dungeons, it's actually the dungeon spitting you out because you've taken your max amount of pain, and doesn't have anything to do with the amulet or something. The amulet allows you to leave the dungeon, with all your shit, but it's weird that at the beginning of the game it says that, and then it just kind of backs up on it. But anyway, let's continue down the story. I just thought it was a random little nitpick I wanted to point out. Now, back to this shop. This shop specializes in artifacts from the dungeon, which basically just means anything from the dungeon that can be picked up and thrown into a fucking bag. There are 4 dungeons, each with guardians who hold a key that opens up a final 5th dungeon door. After progressing through all the dungeons and getting to the 5th door, we learn that the whole dungeon system is actually different dimensions that have been stealing property from a crashed dimensional pirate ship, which is hidden behind the 5th door. All the dungeons are a product of the dimensional space pirates stealing from the other dimensions. After learning this through flavor text, we fight the last dimensional pirate, and learn that the pirates locked themselves in the 5th door from the outside so that the Watchers would not be able to track down and kill them. After this boss fight, the Watchers show up and tell us that we should all be arrested for stealing from these dungeons. All these years, and all of us are criminals. But since we dealt with the dimensional pirates, we are pardoned, but the dungeons are ultimately shut down for any further use, as it is a crime of theft from other dimensions. Yeah, the story doesn't actually really come together until the final door dungeon, and even then it kind of feels like it stitched itself together. I don't really know if they actually had a plan for the story of this game necessarily, but in any case, it threw me for a fucking loop because it was kind of just out of nowhere, but again, another nitpick I suppose. And like I said, throughout the dungeons that you fight, you get little pieces of lore from a dude who's been setting up tents in all the fucking dungeons, and none of them suggest interdimensional space pirates. They definitely suggest a couple of dimensional things, but nothing of the sort about the fucking ending, because holy fudge. You could have baked me an apple pie, smushed it in my face, and learned that it was a blueberry, and that's pretty much the fucking loop that was thrown. But regardless, it doesn't really matter, because the game's fucking great. The game is outstanding. One of the reasons why is because the way I played it as Pointy Stick Man. Fast Pointy Stick Man. God, was it good. Now, the game functions in 2 parts. We have the dungeons and we have town. I realize my hand is not in frame, but here it is. Dungeons and town. 2 different aspects of the same freaking game, but both vitally important to your success in the game. So, in order to break this down, we'll just call it the hero portion of the game and the merchant portion of the game, because that's exactly what the two of them are. So, let's start by talking about the hero portion, the fun part, or at least the more interesting part. Each dungeon has a random number of rooms and enemies, but each floor has rooms with chests and loot. A room before the boss fight that has a lovely spa pool that will let you gain health after relaxing in it, and a room with a tent and a book with some flavor text. Each floor also has a random chance to turn a pit into a glittering hidden room which you have to get to by... These rooms have one of three things: a chest that sends items back to your house safely, extremely useful since your max carrying weight is 20 items, a pillar to activate a horde combat for increasingly better rewards, or a room with some pots and some items laying around. I never really figured out what the last one was about, but hey, free money, right? Now at the ending of your dungeon that you're currently working on, you'll have a chance to fight the big bad guardian at the very end, which, in all honesty, each are unique in their own aspects, but very fucking difficult, at least after the first one. Regardless, after you beat them to death with a blunt object like I do, you simply get a key, and that key will also unlock one of the locks of the final door. And, coincidentally, since you opened up that side of the door, the town will just reopen one of the other dungeons for you and rip up all the boards that it put on there. So, kill everybody in sight, so you can get more shit at a better rate. Dungeons. Now you might be wondering, how does the combat even work in such a game? Well, let me tell you, it's actually quite simple. You take a big long fucking stick, like this one, and you beat your fucking enemies to death with it. At least that's what I did. The combat within the game is fun as hell, allowing you to customize the way you approach your combat, health management, inventory management, and which items work the best for you. Weapons are available in several options for a game of such caliber, and all feel equal and fair to use, each one with a standard attack and a heavier move. After some playing around, I learned that I enjoyed having a very long stick as my weapon of choice, mainly because you can attack enemies quickly, charge across chasms to attack, and deal massive damage with the same charge. And you can poke enemies through obstacles, which I thought was fucking hilarious. I also took along a set of small stick and string, otherwise known as a bow and arrow, so that in case my reach isn't enough, I send smaller sticks to deal with my enemies. The game also features immunity frames whilst dodging, which communicates to me as a human being that speed is better than hit points, so I started along my journey of crafting speed-boosting armors. Each dungeon has 2 mini-bosses and the final guardian, and all while the second mini-boss is just a buffed version of the first mini-boss, they are each challenging within the first runs of the dungeon. As you continue facing the dungeons and escaping with more items, you can craft better equipment and better weapons, leading to better healing items, better damage outputs, and better base stats. This leads to further attempts on the same dungeon becoming immensely satisfying as you cleave through enemies that you once struggled with. After all, hard work and dedication should pay off in future runs of the same dungeon. However, not all artifacts you gain from the dungeon can be used in crafting, so what should you do with them? Should you stack them up in the corner like a hoarder? No! You fucking sell them! Money! That was my way of communicating to you that we're transitioning into the next phase of the game, the merchant phase, as I called it earlier. So, in case that wasn't clear, here's the merchant side of things, the outside the combat bullshit, which is also fun as hell. Your home is also a shop called Moonlighter. In this shop, you can sell literally anything that you took from the dungeon for a moderate price, but each price must be figured out through trial and error through customers coming in and making a certain face at the item's price. So if they are happy, that means you're selling fair price gear, or if they're angry, nothing will happen. As you continue through stronger dungeons, items become more expensive, leading to a wealthier merchant with better gear to continue further along the path to opening that final door. You get it. As you grind, you can see improvements in both aspects of the game. More money means better equipment, being able to buy upgrades for your shop that lead to bonuses to both dungeon combat with increased health or defense, and increased gains from purchases, and more room to store your artifacts. You can also purchase new shops to move into town, but the most useful are the blacksmith and the potion master, as each are essential for your success. They have a decoration dealer that has items to boost aspects of your shop, and an item dealer that you can pay to go dive for certain items within the dungeons themselves. I never really use them, but if you get tired of beating things to death with a stick, you can always send this asshole and he'll deal with your problems for you, and dish out the beatings for you as well. There's also a banker that kind of functions as a gambling stock market, but the payouts aren't impressive, so just stay away from it. Unless you're keen on the ways of the Animal Crossing onion market, or turnip market, or whatever the fuck it is, just stray away from the banker. He's not worth it. Now, I do just want to shift back to the dungeons really quick because there's such a big aspect of the game. There's 4 of them in total. There's technically 5, but the 5th one is the final one, and it's literally just 2 rooms, so I'm not counting it as a dungeon. But let's talk about these 4 dungeons and how unique each of them are. The Golem dungeon has some of the simplest enemies and introduces the game mechanics in a fair but interesting manner. The floor bosses are interesting and have movesets that are meant to trip up players into diving into potentially lethal swings. Whilst the final boss guardian for the dungeon is a poor golem that's stuck to the ground and is easily the quickest guardian to win against. I beat him in one go after all, with a fucking stick. The forest dungeon is up next, with more annoying enemies that capitalize on slow movement and missing dodges with cruel amounts of damage being dealt, if not careful. And while the mini-bosses in this dungeon are easier to dodge, they are just as lethal. Let's just say this. Plants are mean and want nothing more to kill you and eat your rotting corpse slowly over the course of a year or 2. Best not to die by a plant, as they will always slowly digest you for years. This dungeon also harbors the one enemy that I hate more than any other. Fucking Leaf Boy. I fucking hate Leaf Boy. Fuck Leaf Boy. Oh my god. These bastards swing a leaf and have found a way to curve powerful balls of wind at you. In conclusion, get wrecked! The Guardian is naturally a very large plant that spits out projectiles, grows smaller plants to catch you off guard, and tries to whip you like the dirty boy you are. Now, the Forest Dungeon Guardian made me into its fertilizer multiple fucking times, so make sure you gear up and stay on top of how powerful your gear is, because if you don't, you will turn into mulch. I assure you, this thing kicked my ass multiple times, and not just because it had a lot of really good moves, but because it's a fucking tank, so just make sure you have as much damage as you can do with you. And for the love of God, don't use the fucking bow and arrow against this motherfucker. It's not worth the time. The Desert Dungeon is up next and has some of the most projectile-heavy areas of the game, so I hope you guys have been practicing those immunity frame dodge rolls, because one mishap will leave you on fire, beaten, and having your bones dry in the desert with the balls and cubes that live there. The mini-bosses here are some of the hardest in the game, as they quickly switch from spitting fireballs at you to straight-up beaming the power of the sun into your anal cavity to give you an anal bleaching of a lifetime. While this dungeon is easier than the forest one, the Guardian here is a giant golem snake that splits into pieces while puking fire at you at any given moment, and deals massive damage if you have a mishap, but the bastard is just like other breathing sticks. So rip his head off and watch the bugger dry up in the sand like your previous attempts' dead bodies. And finally we have the Tech Dungeon, host to a lot of enemies that, well, I can only assume tried to die by committing suicide via toaster bath, but instead of actually dying, they just gain the ability to electrocute other people. So, here we fucking go. This dungeon has a large amount of enemies that range from close range attacks, area effects, and host an enemy type that resurrects fallen enemies. This dungeon is not meant for the faint of heart, but the mini-bosses within have some of the easiest moves to dodge and take down. And the final Guardian here was beaten in one fight via me, and is just a large pustule of energy that learned how to be mad. Now, my running theory here is that Palpatine and a power circuit had an affair, and this was just their love child, as a pink pustule energy source. But unfortunately, there's no way to prove this, so it's totally unconfirmed, and Palpatine won't get back to me on this accusation, so I'm just going to leave it in the video and hope he doesn't kill me later. Each of these areas have great sprite models that fit the environment, lighting that matches the mood, not to mention the unique color palettes of each dungeon, and amazing music that completely immerses you in the dungeon that you're crawling within. Seriously, this is some of the best music I've heard in a game in quite some time. So I just want to give you guys like 10 seconds of each dungeon music just so you guys can hear it, so here it is. Now, I have been playing these throughout the video, but these tracks are freaking awesome, and they deserve some attention just by themselves. Now, in a perfect world, this game would have gained way more attention than it did at the beginning when it launched, but I think it actually became quite popular after the fact, and it just released to the mobile store, so I thought it would be worth talking about at least. if it's not entirely obvious by my tone this entire video, I thoroughly recommend Moonlighter to you if you guys enjoy dungeon crawling, if you're a Binding of Isaac fan, if you guys like running a shop with some actual feedback. This is the game for you. It's really fun and it's quite cheap these days, so please, you can even get it on mobile device. So this game can be played by anybody as long as you have a phone. I mean, I think it's pretty much ported to everything at this point, but I could be wrong. I know it's definitely on the Switch, so if you guys like the Switch, here's another great game for you. Thank you guys so much for watching this Game Grind episode. I know this game came out a couple of years ago and it's not entirely relevant, but I'm pretty sure in Season 1 I did a couple of them that were like from 2000 something, and it doesn't matter. If I have an opinion on a game, I'll freaking talk about it. So, Moonlighter. Definitely go play it for yourself if you guys are into dungeon crawling. Or if you guys just want to spend 10 hours of your life running a shop. That's what I did. It was quite fun. Game's short. It's cheap. It was worth the time. It felt fair. It relaxed me, which is what a game should do. I see no problems with it. One final thank you. Thank you so much for watching. I truly appreciate it. If you guys want to keep updated on Game Grind, make sure you guys subscribe because it will be coming out every single week, and if you don't know what day it's going to come out, then you better subscribe so you know when it comes. Make sure you like this video if you like my opinion. If you guys have different opinions about this game, make sure you post them down below. I would love to talk to you guys about it. After all, I'm just a man, and my opinion is not God or law. So, if you have a different opinion about Moonlighter, please let me know down in the comments below, and I'll talk to you about it. I really will. I promise. I really promise I will. I will see all you know bros later. Peace for now.